What is going on, Colts Nation, and welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another one, guys. And today we are talking Indianapolis Colts rookies. We are almost all the way through the 2022 NFL season. When to look back, talk about this Colts rookie class as it stands right now. Give them a letter grade here for their performances this season. We're going to break it down by individual player. There are a few players, just as a note, there are a few players that are going to get incomplete grades because either they're not on the roster anymore or they're on the practice squad or they got injured or something of that nature. So there's only a couple guys here that have that. But with that being said, let's dive into it. And let's start with the Colts' first pick in the 2022 draft. In the second round, they took wide receiver Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati. And Alec Pierce, I think he's been pretty solid this year, Derek. What grade would you give him?
You're gonna have to go with a B here for Alec Pierce. I mean, there's definitely still some things that needs to be worked on, especially in the short game when it comes to intermittent passes and whatnot. But Alec Pierce has been a saving grace for this team in a lot of different circumstances this year. Almost makes you want to almost go to an A because of, I think there's been two games this year where Alec Pierce has basically been the stomping point to a Colts win. You could talk about against the Denver Broncos when the Colts were looking to get a field goal to tie the game, to send it into overtime. Alec Pierce had 3 catches on the last drive. One where he practically had to jump over the corner. The corner should have picked it off, but he somehow mossed it and got the first down, a huge first down, which put the Colts in position to score on that drive to keep it going, which they inevitably ended up winning. And then, of course, in that Jacksonville game, scored the game-winning touchdown that put the Colts over the edge. And then even in that loss against the Dallas Cowboys last week, Alec Pierce was a stud in that game. So, there's just a lot of different circumstances where Alec Pierce has shown you give him a chance. You give him those 50-50 chances, and Alec Pierce more than likely is going to end up coming down with it. That's why you drafted him, and, he's showing some promise. So that's why you give him a B here.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, he's struggled at times. He had a rough opening game against the Texans. He's had a couple more games where he's struggled a little bit. He definitely had a forgettable November. He only had 4 catches in the entire month of November. But with that even happening, Alec Pierce still has over 500 yards receiving on 32 catches and 2 touchdowns. You mentioned it. He won a game for the Colts this year. He has looked good, especially in the jump ball, the 50-50 ball. That is translated very nicely over to the NFL level. So Alec Pierce has some things to work on, but I think there's a lot of good to build on. And I think moving forward, he's going to be a pretty good player for the Colts. So I think where they took him, a B is pretty fair. All right, let's move on now to the next pick that the Colts had, and it was another weapon, and he's actually lived up to that hype, surprisingly. The only issue is he hasn't really been targeted as much as a lot of people would hope. Jelani Woods here, coming off a couple weeks ago against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Derek, had a career day, over 80 yards receiving, and he's had a couple moments where when the Colts have targeted him in games, he's taken over games this year. So, with that being said, what grade are you giving him?
Yeah, I mean, for Jelani Woods, you're giving him a B+ here. Almost went with an A- here on this because, like you said, Jelani Woods, just like Alec Pierce this year, has had times where he's taken over games. And again, has been one of the many reasons why the Colts are involved in games, right? Like when you talk about one of the Tennessee Titans games, even though we lost that second matchup, Jelani had a huge game. What was it against Jacksonville? He had 3 catches, 1 for end up being a touchdown. Kansas City, he's the only one that scored touchdowns in that game, and he got 2 of them, right? He had 2 catches for 2 touchdowns, right? That's when we knew Jelani Woods is going to be something. And, for no fault of his own, because the Colts, for some reason, can't seem to figure out that this guy needs to get more passing attempts in the offense. I mean, just the fact that, his numbers and what was it? The previous week when we were playing, I don't remember who it was we were playing. He had those
Pittsburgh.
8 catches for like 90 plus yards. He's had times where he has dropped a few passes. In that New England game, it was very uncharacteristic of him. Sam Ellinger was dropping dimes to him and he just kept dropping it. But, Jelani has shown, in clutch situations, Jelani's got something about him that, needs to keep being exploited.
Yeah, it's very bizarre how the Colts have gone away from him at times this year because he nearly had 100 yards against Pittsburgh the week prior. And then this next week, this last week against Dallas, he's not even on the field for the majority of that game. And he only had, 4 targets in that game. And a lot of those came in the fourth quarter. So it's just bizarre the way the Colts kind of misuse him because he is a weapon and he's young, he's raw, but he's still showing he's using that 6'7" frame to the best of his ability. And he's making plays, and it seems like about every time you throw Jelani the ball, good things happen. So, yeah, the only issue is he's struggled a little bit with some drops this year. Same with Alec Pierce. But overall, I think he definitely, his upside has far outweighed, where his drops and some of his issues are right now. So definitely would say he's a B+ for me as well. He definitely deserves that. Now let's move on to the other third round pick the Colts had, and that's Bernhard Raimann. He is now your starter at left tackle. And Derek, he's definitely had his rookie moments. He's definitely had his welcome to the NFL moments this year as a rookie. But I will say, over the last few weeks, Bernhard Raimann, I really personally feel like he is starting to come into his own as a left tackle. He's not perfect. He has issues still. He's still learning. He's still growing. He's still new to the position. Right. So, but all that to say, I really do feel like Bernhard Raimann is actually giving the Colts good reason to think maybe they actually have their left tackle position solved for the immediate.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest issue with Raimann so far has been the fact that I think it's been pointed out several times by other Colts content creators that his anchor point, he is not very good at that yet. He is still very weak for the position itself. Fans have said, or even content creators have said, like, his mechanics are really good. And I think that's why the Colts, fell in love with the idea of him, being drafted by us, because mechanics wise, you're good. You can always get somebody to, be stronger, right? That just involves more lifting, that involves better eating, that involves better diet, involves more exercise, things like that. You can get somebody to bulk up 10, 15 pounds and get more physical strength, right? Like that happens. But, teaching mechanics like that is much harder to do, and it takes a lot more time most of the time. So, he has been under a lot of pressure because he's had to step in because of the negligence of the former coach and the GM for thinking that Matt Pryor was ready to be the left tackle. And he has just been thrown into the fire, hoping that he is as good as what they think he can be. And they didn't prepare him well enough in the offseason. So, for given the circumstance, like you said, he's a top 3 left tackle, rookie left tackle this year, tackle in general when it comes to that. So everything, all heaven wise, he's going to get better at certain things. I think if he just solidifies that anchor point a little more, he can be a solid left tackle for the future.
Yeah, and I think for that, he's had moments. So a B- I think is fair for Raimann. He's been thrown into, let's be honest, a very unfavorable situation. I mean, he's had to go against some really, really good really good pass rushers. And he's struggled for sure, but he's definitely had moments where he's looked really good. So I think a B- is fair. I was torn between a C+, B-, but I think given the circumstances, I think he's responded well. So now moving on to the last third round pick the Colts have, and clearly the most disappointing, Nick Cross, who was the starter week 1 and has not seen the field since then, Derek. I mean, what else can you say about Nick Cross and just how much he has struggled to get on the field? Really hasn't done a whole lot, been primarily a special teams guy. And I think given the expectations that the Colts had, certainly that we had, he's been a big disappointment this year. And so I think a D is very much, where he is right now, because to go from being the starter, being the guy at the strong safety position to now just not even seeing the field, and getting played over, a 7th round pick and Rodney Thomas, like it's been a very disappointing season for this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it really sucks because, I felt like, Nick Cross was going to have some chances, especially early in the season, but clearly he's just not ready at the moment to take over for the athletic ability that he has. He still needs to get better at reading the offense and being in the right spot. He went from being the full-time starter week 1 to now he's not even getting snaps. So, it's been very concerning because, we talked all off season about this guy maybe being the dark horse on defense that shows up and, delivers a powerful punch to this defense, but it has been anything but that yet. We have yet to see what Nick Cross can actually do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Another guy who really hasn't done a whole lot for this team, Eric Johnson. He was a guy that, we're like, oh, maybe he's going to get some run, but not really so. He's kind of a reserve defensive lineman. He is on the active roster, however, but really hasn't done a whole lot. So I think that's a CC minus for me because he's really a reserve player at this point. So it's kind of just like a meh pick.
Yeah, it stinks because it's like, well, at least Eric Johnson is playing, right? Like, I mean, he kind of has to, it's the only reason you see a C minus rather than, a D, because at least he's playing. But, despite that notion, there's just no other reason to give him anything higher because he's contributed in no way yet.
Yeah, for sure. There's 2 guys here that we can just kind of either put, NA or we can put, incomplete because of 2 different situations. Obviously, Drew Ogletree, he got injured in training camp, out for the season. And then you have Curtis Brooks, who I don't even know if he's on the active roster anymore. I don't even know if he's on the team anymore. He definitely is a guy that we had high expectations for coming out of Cincinnati and just has not delivered at all. Didn't really do anything and was, pretty much a roster bubble guy throughout the entirety of training camp. So I think both these guys, you don't really give a grade to, because there's really not a whole lot, and they were both kind of later round picks as well. So, I mean, Andrew Ogletree is definitely an interesting guy. We'll see next offseason and next training camp and stuff, because he was showing out during training camp, even more than Jelani Woods. So I think that's definitely encouraging. Could he potentially be that 3rd tight end for the Colts next year? We'll see. But the last guy we got to talk about, this is definitely, I think, out of all these guys at the draft for the Colts, has been their biggest steal, Rodney Thomas. He has not only exceeded expectations, but he has been a key contributor on this defense. He shared time with Julian Blackmon, and he's made some plays this year. What grade would you give Julian, or what grade would you give Rodney Thomas here?
You got to give a B+ here. The only reason it's not an A is just because we haven't seen enough like big plays throughout the whole season, but you have seen enough of Rodney Thomas to know that this guy has been solid ever since coming in. I mean, he was a 7th round draft pick, and, for having to take over for Julian Blackmon at times. And then, when Kenny Moore wasn't playing in the last game, they had 3 safeties on the field the majority of the time, Cody. And, Rodney Thomas has had to step into that role. And when it comes to Rodney Thomas, he came in huge in that Denver game. Came in huge in the Kansas City game. There's been multiple times when he's been tested, but yet he has proven time and time again that he can hang with these guys. And I think that's important for where he got drafted to the production we are getting from him. There's not much of a drop off right now. So, I mean, it gives you a very good sign that Rodney Thomas has a lot in store for him.
Absolutely. So what you see from this team is definitely a lot of guys that are contributing, that have a lot of potential with this team. So overall, Derek, if you had to give this Colts draft in 2022 a grade, obviously subject to change, what would you give it right now?
Overall, like when you're looking at this, you have to give the whole class. I mean, I'm giving it a C. As unfortunate as I have to be realistic there. I mean, there's been some solid guys, and then the other half has either been non-existent or has just not done anything production wise. So you've had some guys who, have been starting pieces for this team and have produced in some way. And then the other half, you're just not seeing them at all. So it's right in the middle for me.
Gotcha. I would go a little bit higher. I'd give it a B, just because you have wide receiver 2, you have a tight end that you really are excited about, and then you potentially have your left tackle. Like, I think those 3 right there. And then you throw in Rodney Thomas, who could be a really good safety in this league. So, and you just don't know with Nick Cross at this point. But as it stands right now, I'm going to give it just a B. It could go up if guys like Nick Cross develop, if Raimann develops, if Woods continues to ascend, Alec Pierce as well. Right now, I think it's right down the middle for me. It's a little bit better than average, but it's still pretty average. So,
Yep.
All right, that's going to do it, guys, for this video, kind of looking at some of the rookies for the Colts. Obviously, they haven't even finished their first NFL season, so these rankings and these grades are very subject to change. Let us know your thoughts through these games. What grade would you give this Colts 2022 draft class? What grade would you give some of these players? Let us know these things in the comments below. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. And as always, go Colts.